Evening, everybody, and welcome to the July Conversation with a Doc with Dr. Stephen Grill. I hope you've all been staying cool. Not easy to do these last few days, but anyway, Dr. Grill is a member of Johns Hopkins Regional Physicians and Practices in Howard County. He provides expert and compassionate care for people with movement disorders, and he's the co-founder of the Parkinson and Movement Disorders Center of Maryland. And he has specialized in treating movement disorders since 1995. Sorry, I mangled that. Anyway, now, Dr. Grill, we're turning it over to you.
Okay, good. I'm going to share my screen. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Let's see if I can get this running. Good. So let's start. Let me run this. Okay, so we're going to talk today about, where did that go? We're going to talk today about clinical trials. And we're not going to talk really specifically about some upcoming clinical trials that are going on. We're going to talk about what clinical trials are and why you might want to participate and what the benefit of clinical trials is. So let me first state that I have no financial interest with anything that I'll be talking about. I don't have any relationships with any of the companies in the pharmaceutical industry. So let's talk about what clinical research is. It is different than clinical practice. In clinical practice, we design interventions to help you, and they're specifically to enhance your well-being with a reasonable expectation of success. These are tried and tested methods we use. Research is an activity designed to test an hypothesis and let us develop some conclusions so that we can contribute to the knowledge about Parkinson's and how better to treat it. So very different is research compared to clinical practice. So what are clinical trials? They're experiments on humans that are designed to evaluate the safety and the benefit, the efficacy of new treatments, including drugs, pharmaceuticals. And medical devices, as well as different physical therapies. So first, we're going to talk about clinical trials so you understand what they are, the phases and the designs. How are clinical trials designed? So there are 4 different phases to clinical trials. The first is phase 0, which are exploratory, usually involving animals and some limited human exposure. Safety studies are phase 1, and they're usually done with small numbers of healthy patients and healthy volunteers and patients. Understand that 1/3 of phase 1 trials fail. Phase 2 studies involve larger numbers of patients and collect preliminary data on efficacy, on how effective the treatment is. The safety is also evaluated. 1/2 of those trials fail. Studies which gather more info on safety and effectiveness are phase 3 trials, and this is what's required by the FDA. They include patient populations and different doses and larger numbers of people involved, and 1/3 of those fail. So in order to get it through the FDA, you have to go through phase 3 study and have them be successful. Phase 4 studies are post-marketing studies after approval, and they gather more information on safety, efficacy, and how to use the medicines the best. So again, understand that most clinical trials fail. So well over 95% of clinical trials don't make it through this process. And they're expensive. So clinical trials of new drugs cost about $19 million, and this is a few years old, this slide, but they range from up to $347 million to run a study. The average cost per drug ends up to be $1.4 billion. So this is a major undertaking that the pharmaceuticals undergo in order to get new medicines and treatments to the market. So it takes time. This is the approval process. So the sponsor or the pharmaceutical company develops a protocol. They select investigators. There's a whole approval process. The FDA has to approve the clinical trial. We start recruiting patients. We collect the data, enter it into a computer, analyze it statistically. We present it at meetings and in publications. And if the studies are successful, we apply to the FDA and then it can get approved. So it's a long process that takes years, sometimes 15 years, to test a new medication or treatment. A long process. So let's talk about the clinical trial designs. The most important is the parallel group, meaning that you randomize patients to either active treatment or placebo. And this is the standard of the standard for clinical trials, a placebo-controlled study. There are also not crossover studies where you can have a patient undergo the active treatment and then placebo, or placebo and then active treatment, and then you can compare the patient to themselves. So the benefit of this is that you can have smaller numbers of patients involved, so the statistics is easier. But still, the main thing is really the parallel group, not the crossover. Blinding is very important. So the most standard is to have a double blind where the clinician and the patient do not know what the treatment is. Open label studies are preliminary. And I have to say that most open label studies that seem to give benefit, they fail the double blind clinical trials. So we never rely on open label trials. They give us a hint that something may be beneficial, but it would never get approved on an open label trial or even usually a single blinded trial. And then the main thing is a comparison. We compare one group to the other. Sometimes when there's already an existing medication, a similar medication on the market, the FDA may require a non-inferior study. And this is statistically different. Again, it's not the standard. The standard is parallel group, double blind, placebo-controlled difference comparison. And that's what is the standard to get FDA approval. So let's talk about who's involved. Excuse me, who's involved in the studies. The first is the patient. Obviously, we need patients to be involved and their representative. The physician or investigator is obviously involved. There's a study coordinator, which is often a nurse, coordinating the trial. The sponsor is the, say, pharmaceutical study company. The study monitor is independent and makes sure that we're running the trial well. And then there's an institutional review board. So let's talk about the patient. You should understand if you want to participate in studies, you have both rights and responsibilities. You should know the risks of participation, and it's our responsibility to convey this to you. So what the alternatives are, know that you can withdraw without penalty. You should make the decision to enroll in a study without feeling pressure. You should know the name, the credentials, and the contact information for the study, know the purpose. You should understand who has access to your protected health information. Know what procedures are going to perform, what risks there could be. But you also have a responsibility to follow the direction of us. And you should provide accurate information about your condition and let us know how you're doing in an honest way. Are you having any adverse experiences? And then also you inform the staff or the institutional review board if you think your rights have been violated. The patient representative is there to assist the patient in these roles. That's often a partner or a spouse. So let's talk about the key personnel that are involved that you will see. You will see your clinician, your physician, who's the investigator usually. And our role is to ensure that the study is conducted according to the agreement with the sponsor. We have the responsibility, the really important responsibility to protect your rights, the safety and the welfare of you. We need to control the devices and the drugs that are in investigation. We're responsible for overseeing other study personnel and really the whole study. The study coordinator is a research professional, often a nurse or a technician working under the direction of the principal investigator, who supports, coordinates, manages. They may do the blood draws. They keep a lot of the paperwork, and they really assist and very important in running any clinical trial. The sponsor is usually either a person or a pharmaceutical company or a device manufacturer who takes responsibility for and initiates the clinical investigation. Now, they're usually the ones that are going to end up marketing it, so they have a conflict of interest because they want to see it approved so they can make money. The study monitor is the person delegated by the sponsor who independently oversees the conduct of the clinical trial. And they are not subject to the whims of the sponsor. They have responsibilities to make sure it's carried out correctly. The Institutional Review Board is a board designated by an institution to review, approve, and initiate the initiation of the study, and to conduct a review of what's going on. Make sure that things are still safe, that there aren't a whole bunch of adverse effects. The IRB usually includes physicians, researchers, and also community members, and community members. And they assure that it's ethical, that your rights are respected and protected, and that the risks are minimized. And they also review the consent form to show that it's appropriate. So let's talk about informed consent. This cartoon is not informed consent. Okay, you should feel no pressure to join a study. So let's talk about a very interesting study. This was a study of 126 male inmates with schizophrenia. They were aged 17 to 31, and they had a blood pressure cuff inflated around their necks until they passed out.
Oh.
So they passed out, they fainted, and they had seizures, many of them. This was carried out in 1943. What a horrible thing to do to people, right? We had no protections for these people. They had no choice. They were just told they were participating in this. And, you know, what a horrible thing. So you may not have heard about that, but maybe you've heard about this.
Mhm.
This is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. It was conducted by our public health service, responsible for the healthcare in the country between 1932 and 1972. And I'm embarrassed to say I was alive when it was happening. What they did was they studied the natural progression of untreated syphilis in 600 impoverished rural African-American men in Alabama. The subjects were enticed into the study with free healthcare, meals, and free burial insurance. None were informed they had the disease. None were treated with penicillin when it became a proven treatment in the 1940s. So they just watched their progression. And 40 wives got syphilis, 19 children were born with syphilis. This was a travesty. This was just so unethical, and it was done by our US Public Health Service. So what came out of this was the Belmont Report. These were ethical principles and guidelines to protect human subjects, created by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects in 1978. It was developed in the setting of the Tuskegee syphilis travesty. There were 3 core principles. We should respect people. There should be beneficence. People should have an opportunity for benefit, and there should be justice. So these men that were enrolled, they had no real choice, or they had a choice, but they were enticed into it, and they didn't benefit from the study. They just contributed their data, basically their problems, their symptoms. And the primary areas of application were informed consent, that we assess the risks and benefits. If the risks are too great, putting a blood pressure cuff around people is not a good thing to do. So, and then the selection of subjects, the men that were involved in that study, they were giving all their data, but they were not benefiting from it. The rest of the population was. So this is what came out of it. And the basic principles are respect for people. People are treated as real people. People with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection. Subjects need to enter voluntarily with adequate information. And if people have a diminished autonomy, if people have cognitive problems, it's still our responsibility to make sure that they're protected and that they and their agents understand what's going on. Beneficence means making efforts to secure a patient's well-being, and it's an obligation. Physicians are supposed to do no harm. We should maximize benefits and minimize harms. And then the justice has to do with who receives the benefit from the research and who bears the burdens. And so these are principles that we now adhere to. So informed consent subjects must be given the opportunity to choose what does and doesn't happen to them. Signing a consent form is not the goal. It's that making sure that the person understands what they're getting into. So signing the consent form simply indicates that the subject understands what's going on and gives consent. So they should understand the procedures, the purpose, the risks, benefits, and they should be able to ask any questions they want and to withdraw from the study. And we have to adapt how we talk to people to their capacities. It's an obligation to ensure the understanding and also that it's a voluntary participation. They should not be coerced. They shouldn't be given burial rights. Now, this cartoon says, I don't need informed consent to take your temperature, but actually, when you get admitted to a hospital, you're giving informed consent to these types of procedures. So it really is not quite true. You're giving your consent to be managed by the physicians and the nurses and all the staff in the hospital. Okay, let's get to what clinical trials are. And let's talk a bit about the inclusion-exclusion criteria. So inclusion criteria are factors which allow subjects to participate in a clinical trial. So obviously, if it's a study on Parkinson's, you need to have Parkinson's disease. The exclusion criteria are factors which disqualify subjects from participating. And in clinical trials, there are a lot of exclusion criteria. So the inclusion criteria, this is just an example. The inclusion criteria is that they need to sign consent. They have to be of a certain age. They have to have a real diagnosis of Parkinson's at certain stages. And in this study, they had to have motor fluctuations with 2 hours of off time. Anyway, there's a lot of criteria. And the exclusion criteria are that we can't have pregnant women. You can't have a contraindication to levodopa. You can't have had surgery. You can't have cancer within 3 years. So there's a lot of exclusion criteria. And the take home of this is that clinical trials include patients that are selected, and it does not reflect the general population. So even, patients who have had cancer, we're using medicines for Parkinson's, but the studies may exclude them. So this is sort of confounds things. So who participates? Not everybody are able to. People who participate are aware of the study, they're willing to participate, and they have Parkinson's and little else. They can't have a whole bunch of other comorbid illnesses, And then also it's people who have time. So people that are working may not have time to participate in the clinical trial. They just might not have the time. So this is a cute cartoon. Oh, let me go back 1 second. Whoop. So this is a cute cartoon about this is the perfect clinical trial for me. All I have to do is move to Siberia, become a citizen, learn the language, live in a yurt, and exist on Martian lichens. So this guy says, I'll check the flights, but his cat ain't going. All right. So why participate? A lot of people want to participate in clinical trials because they think they're going to get the latest, greatest treatment. And while that's certainly possible, remember at the beginning, we talked about that most clinical trials fail. So the reason to participate is to contribute to scientific and medical knowledge so that the results can be used to improve the care or the diagnosis of future patients. So certainly some trials may give subjects the possibility of benefit. Monetary or other compensation should not be a reason to participate. We usually do compensate you for your time and effort, but it shouldn't be thousands of dollars. It's really compensating you for your time and your transportation. But one of the good things about clinical trials, you get to spend more time with your doc, and that's always fun, right? Okay, so this is why to participate. These are all the various medicines. I don't know if I can move this. I'll move that there. Okay. So these are all the clinical trials, all the FDA approvals for Parkinson's. And let's go through them. So Here is carbidopa, levodopa. And here, usually I use the generic terms, but here I'm honoring the pharmaceutical companies who made the branded medicines. So yeah, so Sinemet came out in 1975 when I graduated high school. But since then, a whole bunch of more medicines have come out. These are the early dopamine agonists, mostly not in use anymore. This is deep brain stimulation, came out in 1998. So that's been a real advance. And the red arrows are the medicines that I think are miracles, or the treatments that I think are miracles. Then other dopamine agonists came out in the 1990s, some that are still in use, and then a lot of adjunct medicines. So the entacapone, MAO inhibitors. Also, there's Apokin, which is an injectable dopamine agonist as a rescue medicine. Here are the more modern dopamine agonists. There's Rytary and Duopa, and then Nuplacid, which is what we use for psychosis. And I think that's another real important medicine. And then some other helper medicines that aren't really any major advances in my view. And then Inbrija is another rescue medicine. It's an inhalational form of levodopa. So this is why, we have all these tools to treat Parkinson's. And I have to say, again, most people now should live a normal lifespan with Parkinson's. And, we really, in most cases, can have good quality of life. Okay, so how do you find clinical trials if you're interested? So one good source is the Fox Trial Finder, Michael J. Fox Foundation. Michael J. Fox has done a lot for Parkinson's. He's funded a lot of clinical trials, and he also has the website for you to help find clinical trials. Another place is with clinicaltrials.gov, and this lists all clinical trials for every disease, and you can search on that. Sorry, it's advancing. Most clinical centers in the Baltimore, Washington area also have clinical trials. So, most of you are probably treated by a physician at some clinical center, either at one of the academic centers or some of the private practices. And a lot of us are participating in clinical trials. So you can ask your physician, if you're interested, what's going on in the area, and they can probably help you. Okay, so in conclusion, let me try to move this. So in conclusion, and we'll have time for questions, clinical trials are the way to advance treatments. If you want to participate, you must be knowledgeable about clinical trials and consent to participate. Researchers must respect the patients and ensure that they are treated properly. That's our main role. We want, of course, we want to enroll patients in the study, but our primary responsibility is to only enroll in appropriate patients and to make sure that they're treated appropriately, that the informed consent process is real, and that everybody understands what they're getting into. And again, most clinical centers, most of the places where you may be treated are participating in clinical trials, and you can ask about participation. And if you, oh man, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, we're almost done. Okay, and and if you're able to participate, you're a hero. That's all I wanted to say. So again, you're giving of yourself to advance the knowledge so that you and others may benefit from the clinical trials that we're doing. And if you're able and willing to participate and, take some risk, there are adverse effects with medicines, as even medicines that are already on the market, but clinical trials are testing medicines that haven't been tested. So there's the potential for adverse effects. Some of them we might expect based upon what we know about the new treatment, but some of them may be unexpected. So understand that, there are risks, but again, our role and the role of all the other people that are running the clinical trial, the study sponsor and the study monitor, we all want to ensure your safety, and we'll work towards that. So if you're willing and able to participate, then, investigate and see if it's something that you can do. And then that's what leads to all the advances in the treatments. Right now we're hoping for treatments that are going to either slow the disease or stop it in its tracks. So that's what the next goal is, really. Frankly, I'm not sure that we're going to find better treatments. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm not sure that we're going to find a whole bunch of, better symptomatic treatments, but I do feel confident that in the next, I think in our lifetimes and hopefully in the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to have real treatments on neuroprotection and slowing down disease. That's the holy grail in treating Parkinson's disease. So with more clinical trials, hopefully we get to that point, and I think it's a very exciting time. So I think we can open it up for questions, but I have to tell you, I was talking to Judy before that, I'm a clinician. I'm mostly a clinician. I pay attention to what's going on in the literature, but I don't get excited until studies are at phase 3 level. So when they're getting near approval is when I start really paying attention. So in the questions, I hope we focus on, what are clinical trials, why to participate, and what advances we have made. And I'm not going to be talking about, some experiments in rats that are, 20 years away from potential approval. And again, most of the studies, there are so many good ideas out there. There are so many good scientists at the PhD level that are working on the basic science of Parkinson's. And again, very small percentage of these actually lead to improvements, but some of them do. And that's what we look forward to. So, so anyway, why don't we open it up for some discussion? And can we see the attendings?
So, no, but here's the first question. What is the extent of the FDA's oversight on non-drug therapies?
So on they certainly, anything that's a medical device is approved by the FDA. So medical devices and pharmaceuticals are approved by the FDA. Now there are, these alternative treatments, there's supplements and all that, which don't have to go through FDA approval.
Okay, so
So be careful with them, there are, be careful about some of these alternative treatments. People are talking about, all sorts of alternative treatments, and don't assume that they're safe. Okay, just because they may be natural, or not subject to FDA approval because they're considered natural remedies, don't assume that they're safe. Digitalis, which is what digoxin comes from a plant, and that's natural, but it's an important heart medicine. But you don't want to take it if because there's real significant adverse effects. Strychnine is a poison that's from a plant, so not everything from plants are safe. So don't assume that it's safe just because it's all natural. You really can't be assuming that. So if something is touted as working, let's say coenzyme Q10 is available over the counter, and that actually was tested in Parkinson's and shown not to be helpful. But just because it's available does not mean it's safe. Okay, if something works, if some alternative treatment works, unless you believe in magic, then it works because there's a pharmaceutical ingredient in it, and we would never prescribe you something with a pharmaceutical ingredient in it that we didn't know what it was, because we don't know if it has interactions with some of the medicines that you may be on, or if it has adverse effects. So be careful about supplements. A lot of them we think are safe. Vitamin D is obviously most adults are taking, but don't just assume that it's some natural remedy that the FDA is not, that's not subject to FDA approval, that it would be safe. So be careful.
So I'm just going to read all the questions out, and if you don't think you can answer, oh, somebody's frozen. Uh-oh,
Go for
Michael.
it. But I can hear you.
Oh, okay, all right. So the first one is, what is the status of trials with GLP-1 drugs?
I don't know.
Okay.
What phase study, what
What
phase
about,
is that in?
maybe there'll be more like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no,
What
I'm not gonna
about
really talk about specific new treatments. Um,
I know, but I'm gonna ask them just
all
because
right,
people have asked me, so.
okay.
Um, what about holistic medications for Parkinson's?
Well, that's what I was sort of touching on before. What are holistic
Right.
medicines? They're supplements basically. And now you can get mucuna. Has anybody heard of mucuna?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, so they grow it. It's apparently it's mostly grown in India, and this is a substance that is very high in levodopa, very high in levodopa, and it's the same levodopa that's in carbidopa levodopa. So it is levodopa, and you can try this. And but the problem is it doesn't have carbidopa in it. So the carbidopa is there to block the nausea that happens because of the levodopa. So and then also it's unregulated. You don't know how much levodopa you're getting. So if there's when the apocalypse happens, I'll grow some mucuna in my backyard and you'll all come over and we'll drink mucuna tea. But I would not, try to send for this mucuna. The thought that it's natural, but we don't know how much you're getting. So wouldn't you much rather take a pill that has a very specific amount of levodopa in it, so that you know what you're getting every time, rather than drinking tea or somehow taking mucuna capsules? I think you can get mucuna capsules, but again, it doesn't have the carbidopa in it. So these holistic medicines that are being advocated, you really, really, really have to be careful about them.
Does Ozempic have any effect on Parkinson's?
Not to my knowledge. I've had a couple of people that have been on it. I don't think there's any real specific effect in Parkinson's.
Okay, next one. How promising is the research being done on the effects of semaglutide and similar drugs for PD?
I don't have the expertise to talk on that.
Okay, and then the same person asks about, you're probably not going to answer these either. Same question for the following drugs that are currently being used on mice. And I'm going to not have trouble to pronounce them.
No, don't even bother. Don't even bother.
Okay, all
I'm
right.
not following any studies in mice. I mean,
Okay,
you know,
okay.
yeah.
All right, that might be it. And then somebody asked me about cannabis and
Okay.
what that could, if that could help symptoms.
Right. So there haven't been any good blinded studies of cannabis, so I can't recommend it. I do have patients that are using it, and it relaxes people, and so indirectly it can help tremor and anxiety. It helps people sleep. CBD oil can be helpful for a topical CBD oil without the THC in it. Can be helpful for various pains, and I'm really convinced that that works. Enough people say it works. Um, but be careful. So, most of us are in our 60s or 70s or 80s, and maybe we used marijuana, THC, when we were in high school and college. It makes you think weird, at least from what I remember. And for people with cognitive problems, I'm really not a fan of it. If you have early, even executive dysfunction, or frankly, if you have dementia, then I really would not see it as anything that people should be using. And there's no direct benefit in Parkinson's, but it does help people sleep. And so if you're young with Parkinson's and not having any cognitive problems, I don't prevent people from, I don't try to tell people definitely don't use it. But if you have advanced Parkinson's, if you're in your 70s or 80s, I'm just not thinking there's anything there to suggest that it's not helpful. We have, if you're having trouble sleeping, we have tried and tested methods for that. We often use sedating antidepressants like trazodone or mirtazapine. And we have other, if you have REM behavioral sleep disorder, we're using clonazepam for that. But, we have regulated medicines that we know the exact dose you're getting, we know the effects, we know the side effects. And so we can treat the symptoms using, the medicines, the armamentarium that we have to treat you, rather than using THC for certain things or for sleep or whatever. But again, I don't prevent, if you're young and without cognitive problems, then, people tell me they're taking it, I'm sort of okay with it.
Okay, those are all the questions I have. Does anybody else have any questions? If you're listening, you can either just in the chat or in the question and answer. Anybody? Well, okay, I guess not. All right, everybody, go enjoy your evening. Dr. Grill, enjoy your next meeting, and thank you very much.
Very good. Okay, nice to see everybody. And I recognize some of the names there too.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good evening, everybody.